Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive into a corner of Roman history that's anything but glamorous, a role often overlooked in the grand sagas of emperors and gladiators, but one that was absolutely vital to the machine of the Roman Empire, the tax collector. Imagine, if you will, the scorching Mediterranean sun beating down on dusty provincial roads, the distant clamor of a bustling market, and a quiet dread settling over the faces of merchants and farmers as they spot your approach. This isn't the life of a conquering hero, nor the quiet dignity of a scholar. This is the life of a publican, a Roman tax collector. And let me tell you, it sucked. Like, really, truly sucked. You might think, oh, money, power, sounds good. But trust me, you probably wouldn't have survived a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the bustling heart of Rome, not as a senator or a general, but as a hopeful entrepreneur, an aspiring publican. The very word itself, publicanus, sounds official, almost important, doesn't it? But beneath that veneer of respectability lies a world of cutthroat competition, immense risk, and constant, gnawing anxiety. You've come to the forum, not for a political debate or a gladiatorial spectacle, but for an auction where the very right to fleece an entire province is up for grabs. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and ambition. You stand among a throng of other hopefuls, men of varying degrees of wealth and desperation, all eyeing each other with a mixture of suspicion and shared, unspoken understanding. These aren't just any auctions. These are the lifeblood of the Roman state, the means by which the vast, sprawling empire funds its legions, its roads, its aqueducts, and its lavish games. And you, my friend, want a piece of that action. Consider the sheer audacity of the system. Rome, in its infinite wisdom and practical efficiency, decided it was far too much trouble to collect taxes itself. Why bother with the logistical nightmare of setting up a bureaucratic apparatus in every single corner of its vast dominion when you could just outsource it? Brilliant. Right for Rome. Absolutely. For you, the publican. A ticking time bomb. You listen as the auctioneer, a stentorian voice cutting through the din, announces the province up for bid. Let's say it's Asia Minor, a land rich in resources, fertile plains, and bustling trade routes. Sounds promising, doesn't it? But with that promise comes a colossal price tag. The Roman state isn't just selling you the right to collect taxes, they're selling you the responsibility to deliver a fixed sum, often astronomically high, regardless of actual economic conditions, natural disasters, or local uprisings. You're essentially buying a massive, potentially bankrupting, IOU to the most powerful empire in the known world. The bidding begins, a flurry of shouts and gestures. You see your rivals, some seasoned veterans with weathered faces and wary eyes, others fresh-faced optimists, perhaps even fools, blinded by the potential for immense profit. The sums escalate rapidly, each bid a gamble of truly epic proportions. You've pooled your resources, perhaps even borrowed heavily from shrewd Roman financiers, men who would have your hide, and then some. If you failed to repay them, this isn't just your personal fortune on the line, it's the fortunes of your partners, your family, your entire lineage. And here's a common historical misconception. People often think publicans were simply individuals working alone. But in reality, they often formed powerful, often ruthless, syndicates or societas publicanorum. These companies were massive financial enterprises, akin to modern corporations, complete with shareholders, managers, and a vast network of agents operating throughout the provinces. You, as a publican, might be part of one of these powerful groups. meaning the pressure to succeed wasn't just on your shoulders, but on the collective shoulders of dozens, even hundreds of investors. Imagine the boardroom meetings, if you will. But instead of quarterly earnings reports, it's reports on famine, rebellion, and just how much more blood you can wring from the turnip. The tension in the forum is palpable. You feel a bead of sweat trickle down your temple, despite the relatively cool morning air. The auctioneer's hammer rises and falls with a rhythm that seems to echo the pounding of your heart. You've calculated your risks. You've studied the demographics of Asia Minor. You've tried to estimate the potential yield from its grain harvests, its silver mines, its port taxes. But there are always unknowns. Aren't there a bad harvest? A sudden plague? A governor with a grudge? Any of these could tip your carefully balanced scales into utter financial ruin. Think about the sheer variety of taxes you'd be responsible for collecting. There wasn't just one flat tax. Oh no. Rome was far more creative than that. You'd be dealing with land taxes, tributum soli, head taxes, tributum capitis, customs duties, portoria, and even taxes on inheritances and manumitted slaves. Each one had its own complexities, its own loopholes, its own potential for resistance. And you, the publican, were expected to be an expert in all of them. A human calculator, a relentless enforcer. There's a subtle murmur through the crowd. A particularly large bid has just been placed, a sum so vast it makes your stomach clench. You glance at your partners, their faces grim, calculating. Do you dare go higher? The temptation of immense profit is seductive, a siren song whispering of sprawling villas, lavish banquets, and political influence. But the abyss of bankruptcy looms just as large. This isn't just about making money, it's about survival. For many, becoming a publican was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to climb the social ladder or simply avoid financial ruin. One of the curious academic debates still unresolved among historians is the exact extent to which publicans truly enriched themselves versus merely surviving. While popular imagination paints them as universally fabulously wealthy, the reality was often far more precarious. Many likely struggled to even break even, constantly battling against unforeseen expenses and the inherent difficulties of their work. Was it a guaranteed path to riches, or a high-stakes lottery where most tickets were losing ones? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but for every publican who built a fortune, there were likely several who lost everything. You remember stories, whispered in the taverns, of publicans who had failed, men who had bid too high, miscalculated their provincial yields, or simply succumbed to the overwhelming opposition of the populace. Their fates were not pretty. Imprisonment for debt, the confiscation of all assets, public humiliation. These were just a few of the pleasantries awaiting a failed publican. The Roman legal system, while sophisticated in many ways, was utterly merciless when it came to debts owed to the state. And you, by signing that contract, were essentially signing away your future, your freedom, your very life, to the whim of the empire's relentless financial demands. The auctioneer's voice cracks again, calling for final bids. You take a deep breath, the dust of the forum scratching at your throat. This is it, the moment of truth. You raise your hand, a silent signal, and a new, slightly higher bid is called out. The tension is unbearable. Others hesitate, perhaps seeing the madness in your eyes, or perhaps simply reaching the limits of their own financial nerve. The hammer pauses, suspended in the air. A collective breath is held. And then, with a resounding thud, it falls, adjudicatum sold. You've done it. You've won the bid for the right to tax Asia Minor. A wave of both exhilaration and profound terror washes over you. You've just committed to collecting an unimaginable sum for the Roman state. And now, the real work, the truly grueling, soul-crushing, dangerous work begins. You are now officially a Roman tax collector. And trust me, you are about to discover just how truly awful that job was. The game has begun, and the odds are stacked against you. The ink on the contract is barely dry, and already the weight of the empire's greed settles on your shoulders. You've just committed to delivering a fixed, often exorbitant sum of money to the Roman treasury from your assigned province, Asia Minor. In this case, this isn't a percentage of what you collect. It's a fixed quota that Rome demands, come hell or high water. And if you don't meet it, well, we'll get to that. But suffice it to say, it involves a lot less high water and a lot more hell. Imagine the pressure. You're not just collecting taxes, you're financing the Roman state. Every legionary's pay, every new road paved, every grand temple erected, every chariot race in the Colosseum, a portion of it, however small, depends on your ability to squeeze every last denarius out of the provincial populace. This isn't a gentle request. It's a relentless, soul-crushing demand. You're essentially a human ATM for the Roman Empire, and they keep hitting withdraw with alarming regularity. Your first task is to set up your operation in Asia Minor. You arrive with a retinue of agents, scribes, and enforcers, a small army. In essence, all paid for out of your own pocket. Remember, Rome isn't providing you with a ready-made bureaucracy. You are the bureaucracy. You have to establish offices, hire local help, and disseminate information about what's owed. This is no small feat in a vast, diverse province with varying languages, customs, and levels of resistance to Roman rule. You immediately begin to assess the true economic landscape. The beautiful, idealistic estimates you made back in Rome, based on official reports and optimistic projections, now face the harsh reality of the ground. You ride through fertile valleys, yes, but you also see drought-stricken fields, villages still recovering from past rebellions, and merchants whose goods were confiscated by a previous, equally rapacious, publican. The reality on the ground is almost always far grimmer than the ledger books in Rome suggest. And here's where the suck truly begins. You are solely responsible for any shortfall. If a crop fails, if a plague decimates a town, if a sudden bandit raid disrupts trade, Rome doesn't care. Your contract is your bond, and that fixed sum is due. Regardless, this forces you into an incredibly difficult, ethically dubious position. To avoid ruin, you must extract every last coin, often resorting to methods that would make even a modern loan shark blush. You start with the basics, the land tax, or tributum soli. This is levied on agricultural land, and you send your agents out to assess properties, measure fields, and estimate yields. But how do you accurately measure land that might be illegally occupied, or whose boundaries are constantly shifting due to erosion or local disputes? How do you account for a farmer who intentionally underreports his harvest, hiding sacks of grain in secret caches? You can't exactly trust everyone, to be honest. This leads to arbitrary assessments, forced remeasurements, and endless disputes that quickly escalate from grumbling to outright defiance. Then there's the head tax, tributum capitis, levied on individuals. This is often the most resented. Imagine going into a village and demanding money from every single person, regardless of their ability to pay. The elderly, the infirm, the landless laborers, everyone is a potential source of revenue. This isn't just about wealth, it's about existence. You see the fear in their eyes, the resentment building like a storm cloud, as your agents count heads and demand payment. A Roman humorist might quip that a publican's favorite number was more, but in reality, it was usually just enough to keep me out of debtor's prison. A little-known fact about Roman tax collection is the incredible variety of creative, often oppressive, taxes publicans were authorized to collect. Beyond the standard land and head taxes, there were market tolls, taxes on public baths, salt taxes, taxes on bridges, taxes on fishing rights, and even taxes on the manumission of slaves. Each one was a separate stream of revenue, but also a separate point of contention with the local populace. You weren't just a tax collector, you were a walking, breathing embodiment of every single one of Rome's fiscal demands, and every single one of their petty restrictions. You also face the constant threat of corruption, not just from those you are taxing, but from within your own ranks. Your agents, being human, are susceptible to bribes. A local official might offer them a cut to overlook some assets, or a wealthy merchant might try to grease palms to get a lower assessment. You have to constantly monitor your own staff, knowing that any illicit dealings on their part directly impact your bottom line, and ultimately, your contract with Rome. It's a game of perpetual suspicion, where trust is a luxury you can rarely afford. Consider the customs duties, or portoria. These were taxes levied on goods passing through borders or ports. You'd set up collection points at every strategic bottleneck, inspecting wagons, ships, and caravans. Imagine the sheer volume of goods, the endless haggling over values, the attempts to smuggle contraband, or simply to hide taxable items. You become a master of estimation, negotiation, and intimidation, trying to ensure that not a single piece of silk, no sack of spices, no jar of olive oil, escapes your grasp without contributing its due to the Roman coffers. The power you wield is immense, almost absolute within your sphere. You can seize property, imprison debtors, and even impose fines. This authority, however, is a double-edged sword. Every act of enforcement, every seizure, every fine levied, fuels the resentment of the local population. You are not seen as a representative of law and order, but as an instrument of oppression. You are the face of Roman greed, and you become a lightning rod for all the anger and frustration simmering beneath the surface of provincial life. Historians still debate the extent to which publicans were truly autonomous versus being subtly influenced by Roman governors or local elites. While theoretically independent contractors, the reality was often far more nuanced. A powerful governor could make your life utterly miserable, blocking your efforts, undermining your authority, or even siding with the locals against you. Conversely, a corrupt governor might collude with you, sharing in the spoils of your exploitative practices. It's a complex web of power dynamics, and you, the publican, are often caught in the middle. There's a unique, almost psychological toll to this job. You are constantly surrounded by people who hate you. Farmers who curse your name as you take their last few bushels of grain. Merchants who spit on the ground after your agents leave. Families who silently resent your intrusion into their meager lives. You become isolated, a pariah in the very communities you are tasked with governing. Even if you try to be fair, even if you try to be humane, the system itself forces you to be a villain. You must collect, or you face ruin. And so, you harden yourself, building a thick shell of indifference, or perhaps despair. The sheer logistical challenge is mind-boggling. Rome itself was a complex society, but imagine trying to apply Roman tax laws and collection methods to dozens of different cultures, each with their own traditions, their own methods of commerce, and their own deeply ingrained resistance to foreign rule. You have to learn the local customs, understand the local economy, and anticipate local forms of evasion. It's a constant, uphill battle against an entire populace, all united by a common desire to keep their hard-earned wealth out of your hands. You also have to contend with the sheer distance and slow communication. If you have an issue, a legal dispute, or a question about a particular tax code, getting clarification from Rome could take weeks, even months. By then, the opportunity might be lost. The debt might have gone cold, or the situation might have escalated beyond your control. You are, in many ways, on your own, operating in a vast, often hostile, foreign land, with only your wits and your small band of agents to rely on. So, you find yourself waking up each day under the relentless pressure to meet that monumental quota. The empire doesn't ask for much, just everything. You push your agents harder, you implement more stringent collection methods, and you become more ruthless in your pursuit of every last sestertius. The line between legitimate collection and outright extortion blurs, then vanishes entirely. Because for you, the publican, it's no longer about fairness or justice, it's about survival. And in the Roman Empire, survival often meant making someone else suffer. Having won the bid and established your operations, You now face the true crucible of your profession, the furious, often violent, resistance of the people you're tasked with taxing. You, the publican, are no longer just a name on a contract. You are the physical embodiment of Roman greed. And every single sestertius you collect feels like a direct assault on the livelihoods, and sometimes the very dignity, of the provincial populace. Imagine walking through a bustling market in Ephesus, a vibrant city in Asia Minor. The air is alive with the chatter of merchants, the calls of street vendors, and the rich scents of spices and exotic fruits. But as you and your agents approach, a hush falls over the crowd. Eyes that were once friendly now turn cold, suspicious, even hostile. You feel the weight of their collective gaze, a tangible sense of resentment that presses down on you more heavily than the midday sun. Your first attempts at collection are met with a wall of evasion. Farmers claim their harvests were meager, merchants swear their goods are worthless, and citizens suddenly develop convenient illnesses that prevent them from working. Everyone seems to have a story, a reason why they cannot pay. And while some of these stories might be genuine, with a chilling certainty that most are elaborate fabrications designed to keep their meager wealth out of your clutches. This is where the direct conflict begins. You can't simply take their word for it. Your contract with Rome demands a fixed sum, and if you don't get it from these people, you'll have to make up the difference yourself. So, you start to push. Your agents, often former soldiers or hardened locals, begin to apply pressure. Inspections become invasive, assessments become aggressive, and the polite requests for payment morph into demands, then threats. A common scene might involve a farmer, his face etched with worry lines, protesting that his grain yield was half of what you've assessed. He shows you withered stalks, speaks of late rains, and points to the hungry mouths of his children. You, however, know that the census data and your own crude estimates suggest otherwise. Do you believe him and risk your quota? Or do you seize a portion of his crop, knowing that it might plunge his family into starvation? The system leaves you with no good options. Every decision you make is a choice between your own financial ruin and the suffering of those you tax. A local might jokingly say that a publican's heart was colder than an alpine winter, but for you, it was often a necessary defense mechanism. The anger isn't always passive. You hear whispers of discontent, see defiant glares, and occasionally encounter outright physical resistance. A merchant might accidentally spill a vat of olive oil on one of your agents, or a group of villagers might block a road, preventing your men from entering. These are minor acts of rebellion, but they are constant, chipping away at your authority and slowing your collection efforts. Remember, Roman citizens in Italy were largely exempt from direct taxes, paying only customs duties and inheritance taxes. It was the provincials, the conquered peoples, who bore the brunt of the Roman fiscal system. They had no say in the Roman Senate, no representation, and no recourse against your demands. You, the publican, were the very personification of their subjugation, the constant reminder that they were conquered, and their wealth now belonged to Rome. This resentment often escalated into outright violence. There are historical accounts of publicans and their agents being attacked, even killed, by enraged mobs. Imagine being surrounded by a group of angry villagers, their faces contorted with fury, wielding farming implements or stones. Your small band of agents might be outnumbered, and your Roman authority means little when faced with the raw, visceral anger of a desperate populace. The threat of a riot, of being lynched in a provincial town square, is a very real and present danger that hangs over your head every single day. One particularly fascinating detail often overlooked is how publicans sometimes employed local informants to help them identify hidden wealth or tax evaders. This practice, while effective, further fueled the animosity. Neighbors turned against neighbors, creating a climate of suspicion and betrayal within the very communities you were meant to serve. Imagine living in a village where anyone might be reporting your assets to the publican's agents for a small reward. It destroyed trust and bred an even deeper hatred for your profession. The problem wasn't just the sheer amount of taxes, but the arbitrary nature of their collection. While Rome had laws and regulations, the vast distances and your near-absolute authority meant that enforcement was often left to your discretion. This led to widespread abuses, excessive valuations, arbitrary fines, and the infamous practice of farming the revenues, where publicans would often collect more than the official tax due, pocketing the difference. This wasn't just greed. It was often a necessity to meet your quota and make a profit. But it solidified your image as a ruthless exploiter in the eyes of the provincials. Historians still openly debate the extent to which publican abuses were a primary cause of provincial unrest versus merely exacerbating pre-existing grievances against Roman rule. Was the publican truly the spark? Or just more fuel on an already burning fire of resentment? It's a complex chicken and egg question, but one thing is clear. Publicans were almost universally reviled. You find yourself employing increasingly harsh methods, seizing tools, livestock, or even personal possessions to compel payment, imprisoning those who cannot pay, leaving their families destitute. These actions, while necessary to meet your contractual obligations, only serve to deepen the hatred and make your life more precarious. You become a pariah, not just in the eyes of the taxed, but often in your own eyes as well. The constant pressure to meet your quota transforms you, eroding your empathy and forcing you to become a figure of fear. Think about the psychological toll. You are constantly distrusted, constantly reviled. You cannot relax, cannot form genuine relationships with the locals. Every friendly face might be hiding resentment. Every polite gesture a veiled attempt to deceive you. You live in a state of perpetual vigilance. Your senses heightened, always aware of the simmering anger just beneath the surface. It's an isolating existence, where your only companions are your equally hated agents and the cold comfort of your burgeoning or dwindling ledger books. Even the simple act of traveling becomes dangerous. You can't move freely through the province without a substantial escort. Every isolated road, every dense forest, every mountain pass could hide bandits or worse, desperate locals driven to brigandage by your own oppressive taxes. Your life is a constant series of calculated risks, weighing the necessity of collecting taxes against the very real threat to your safety. You've learned to read the subtle cues, the sudden silence in a busy square, the way people avert their eyes, the nervous glances exchanged between villagers. These are the danger signs, the warnings that you are pushing too hard, that the simmering resentment is about to boil over, and when it does, it can be swift and brutal. So, as you lay your head down each night in a fortified villa, guarded by your loyal, or at least well-paid agents, you might hear the distant sounds of the province you are bleeding dry. Perhaps it's the mournful cry of an owl, or the rustle of wind through the olive groves. But in your mind, it's the whispers of resentment, the silent curses, and the grinding gears of an empire that demands more, always more, leaving you to face the fury of those who have nothing left to give. Even if you manage to navigate the treacherous waters of public resentment, a far more insidious threat looms: the Roman governor. This is a person who, on paper, is your superior, representing the full authority of the Roman state. But in practice, they are often a capricious, powerful, and potentially corrupt individual whose shifting allegiances and personal ambitions can make your life as a publican a living hell. You arrive at the governor's grand residence in the provincial capital, perhaps Antioch or Pergamum. It's an imposing villa, far more luxurious than anything you could ever afford. Even with your most optimistic profit projections, the air is thick with the scent of incense and political maneuvering. You are ushered into a waiting room, filled with petitioners, sycophants, and other Roman officials, all vying for the governor's attention. You are a publican, a necessary evil, and you feel the subtle disdain even from the lowest of the governor's household staff. The governor himself is a man of immense power, appointed by the Senate or the emperor. He commands the legions stationed in the province, administers justice, and ostensibly oversees all aspects of Roman rule. He can, with a flick of his wrist, make your life incredibly difficult, or, if he chooses, provide you with crucial support. Your fate, to a large extent, rests in his hands. And here's the rub: while you are technically independent contractors, responsible for your own collections, the governor can significantly impact your ability to do your job. He might decide to champion the cause of the provincials, perhaps genuinely believing them to be overtaxed, or, more likely, seeing political advantage in appearing to be their protector. This could mean hindering your efforts, delaying legal proceedings against debtors, or even openly criticizing your methods. A publican might joke that dealing with the common folk was a brawl, but dealing with a governor was a slow, agonizing strangulation. Conversely, a corrupt governor might see you as an opportunity. He might demand a cut of your profits, offering his protection and assistance in exchange. Imagine a discreet conversation, late at night, in a dimly lit room, where the governor subtly suggests that certain facilitation fees would ensure your operations run smoothly. Refuse, and you might find your access to vital resources cut off. Your agents suddenly facing trumped-up charges, or local resistance mysteriously escalating. Agree, and you become complicit in a deeper layer of exploitation, enriching a man who already possesses vast wealth and power. This delicate dance with the governor is a constant source of anxiety. You can never be sure where you stand. One day, he might grant you an audience and offer a sympathetic ear to your difficulties. The next, he might issue an edict that directly undermines your collection efforts. His decisions are often driven by factors completely beyond your control: political machinations in Rome, personal vendettas, or simply a desire to enrich himself before his term ends. One particularly thorny issue concerned legal jurisdiction. While you had the authority to seize property and imprison debtors, any significant legal disputes would often have to go through the governor's court. This meant that if a powerful local elite refused to pay or successfully argued against your assessment, you were at the mercy of the governor's judgment. And if the governor had been sufficiently persuaded by the local elite, perhaps with gifts or promises of political support, your case could be stalled indefinitely, or worse, ruled against you, leaving you with a massive, uncollectible debt. A fascinating, though often overlooked, aspect of this relationship was the governor's role in setting the overall tone for Roman rule in the province. A benevolent governor might try to balance the needs of the empire with the welfare of the provincials, leading to a slightly less oppressive environment for you. A harsh, avaricious governor, on the other hand, could create a climate of fear and exploitation that, while potentially beneficial for your collections in the short term, would inevitably lead to widespread unrest, making your job far more dangerous and difficult in the long run. Historians still debate the true extent of official Roman oversight of publican practices. While theoretically there were laws to prevent egregious abuses, the sheer distance from Rome and the vast power wielded by governors often meant that publicans operated with considerable impunity, or at least under the protection of a complicit governor. The line between legitimate tax collection and state-sanctioned extortion became incredibly blurry, often defined only by the moral compass or lack thereof of the individuals in power. You constantly send reports back to your syndicate in Rome, detailing your progress, your difficulties, and, implicitly, the challenges posed by the current governor. Your partners, shrewd financiers back in the capital, are constantly evaluating your performance, weighing the risks, and perhaps even lobbying their own contacts in the Senate to influence the governor's decisions. You are a pawn in a much larger game of political chess, and the stakes are your fortune and your freedom. Consider the classic example of Verus, the notoriously corrupt governor of Sicily. While he wasn't directly a publican, his extensive plundering of the province vividly illustrates how a governor could abuse his power, and by extension, how publicans could be either tools or victims in such a regime. A publican operating under Verus would have faced an impossible choice: either participate in his schemes and share the ill-gotten gains and the subsequent public outcry, or resist him and face the full, vengeful wrath of a powerful Roman official. You live with the constant knowledge that a single accusation, even a false one, lodged with the governor could lead to your downfall. A disgruntled provincial, a rival publican, or even one of your own agents seeking revenge, could spin a tale of your abuses that, if the governor found it convenient, could result in your assets being seized, your contract revoked, and your reputation utterly destroyed. Rome, for all its legal sophistication, was still a place where powerful men could crush lesser ones with relative ease. The governor also controls the military presence in the province. If a local uprising occurs, or if your agents face overwhelming resistance, it is the governor's legions that you depend on for protection and enforcement. But what if the governor decides not to send troops? What if he deems your situation a local issue and refuses to intervene, leaving you and your agents exposed? This is not an idle fear. Many publicans faced such abandonment, left to fend for themselves against an enraged populace. So, you learn to tread carefully. You send lavish gifts, carefully worded letters, and perhaps even personal assurances of loyalty to the governor. You attend his banquets, even if you despise the sycophantic atmosphere, and you listen attentively to his pronouncements, trying to discern his mood, his intentions, and any subtle shifts in the political winds that could impact your operations. The relationship between publican and governor is a symbiotic one, often based on mutual distrust and necessity. The governor needs the tax revenue you provide to maintain order and fund his own ambitions, and you need his authority to enforce your collections. But like any such relationship, it is fraught with peril, a precarious balance of power where one misstep can send you tumbling into the abyss. As you conclude your dealings with the governor for the day, stepping out of his opulent villa and back into the dusty streets of the provincial capital, you feel a familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach. The sun may be setting, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, but the shadow of the governor's influence and the constant threat of his capricious power looms large over your entire enterprise. You are a publican, caught between the demands of Rome, the fury of the provincials, and the unpredictable whims of the very men sent to oversee the empire's justice. You've battled the angry populace and navigated the shifting sands of gubernatorial politics. Now, you descend into the murky depths of the Roman economy, a world where bribery, blackmail, and bad debts aren't just occupational hazards, they're the very air you breathe. Your life as a publican is a constant tightrope walk, a desperate scramble to extract enough wealth to meet your quota, all while avoiding the traps laid by cunning provincials, desperate debtors, and your own insatiable greed. Imagine a wealthy landowner, an influential local elite, who owes a substantial sum in land taxes. He invites you to his sprawling estate, a place of lush gardens and cool fountains. He offers you lavish hospitality, rare wines, and exquisite food. And then, subtly, the conversation turns to his tax assessment. He doesn't directly offer a bribe. Oh no, that would be crude. Instead, he speaks of mutual understanding, of facilitating smoother operations, of gifts of appreciation. He might imply that, should his assessment be adjusted, he would be far more inclined to ensure the cooperation of his tenants and neighbors, perhaps even helping you identify others who are, shall we say, less compliant. This is the art of bribery in the Roman world, a delicate dance of insinuation and unspoken promises. You face a constant ethical dilemma. Do you accept the gift and risk being caught in a web of corruption, potentially opening yourself up to blackmail later? Or do you refuse, alienating a powerful figure who could make your life incredibly difficult, perhaps by inciting resistance among the local populace or by lodging a complaint with the governor? For many publicans, the line between legitimate collection and illicit gain blurred so completely that it ceased to exist. You're not just collecting taxes, you're playing a high-stakes game of political and financial chess, where every move has consequences. Then there's the subtle art of blackmail. You discover that a prominent merchant has been illegally importing goods, or that a local official has been skimming from public funds. This information is gold. You can confront them directly, threatening to expose their misdeeds to the Roman authorities, a sure path to ruin for them. Or, you can offer them a way out, a significantly reduced tax burden in exchange for their silence and, perhaps, a hefty contribution to your personal coffers. This isn't just about maximizing your profits, it's about protecting yourself. By having dirt on powerful locals, you gain leverage, ensuring their cooperation and preventing them from undermining your operations. But be careful. The blackmailed often become the blackmailers. What if the merchant you've squeezed decides to inform the governor of your own corrupt practices? What if he records your demands, gathers witnesses, and turns the tables on you? You are constantly looking over your shoulder, knowing that the very tactics you employ to survive could be used to destroy you. The Roman world was a viper's nest of intrigue, and as a publican, you were often right in the middle of it. And then there are the bad debts. These are the truly infuriating, soul-crushing part of your job. Imagine a province suffering from a drought, or a city ravaged by a minor epidemic. Suddenly, large segments of the population are unable to pay their taxes. Their fields are barren, their shops empty, their families starving. You ride through the countryside, seeing the genuine poverty, the despair etched on their faces. Your agents return with empty hands, reporting widespread destitution. Rome, however, cares little for your tales of woe. Your contract demands a fixed sum. So what do you do with these uncollectible debts? You can't simply write them off. They come out of your own pocket. You have to pursue them, relentlessly, even if it means seizing the last goat from a starving family, or dismantling a farmer's humble home to sell its timbers. This isn't just cruelty, it's a desperate act of self-preservation. A Roman cynic might say that a publican's favorite instrument was the chisel, for chipping away at the very last vestiges of provincial wealth. A lesser-known fact about publicans is that they often became moneylenders themselves. If a provincial couldn't pay their taxes on time, you might offer them a loan at exorbitant interest rates to cover their debt. This seems helpful, doesn't it? But it's a trap. The interest rates were often so high that the debtor would quickly find themselves in an even deeper hole, perpetually indebted to you. This created a vicious cycle of dependency, solidifying your control over their lives and ensuring a continuous stream of revenue, even if it was just interest payments on their original tax debt. It's a remarkably effective, albeit brutal, form of financial subjugation. Historians still openly debate the prevalence of usury lending at excessively high interest rates by publicans. While some argue it was a necessary evil to ensure collections, others point to it as a clear example of systemic exploitation, designed to trap provincials in perpetual debt. Was it simply shrewd business, or morally reprehensible extortion? The answer likely depended on your perspective, and whether you were the lender or the indebted. Your ledgers become a complex web of payments, arrears, loans, and collateral. You constantly juggle accounts, trying to figure out who owes what, who might be hiding assets, and who is simply beyond hope. You have agents whose sole job is to track down debtors, to demand payment, and to seize assets when necessary. They become experts in valuation, in intimidation, and in finding the hidden corners where desperate people stash their last few coins. The psychological toll of this constant financial pressure, this unending pursuit of money, is immense. You are always calculating, always strategizing, always looking for an angle. Trust is a luxury you cannot afford. Every interaction is viewed through the lens of potential profit or loss. Your relationships, even with your own partners, are strained by the constant stress and the ever-present threat of financial ruin. You learn to live with threats, too, not just from angry mobs, but from debtors who, having lost everything, might seek desperate revenge. Your fortified villa isn't just for show, it's a necessity. Your armed guards aren't just for ceremony, they're essential for your survival. Every journey outside your stronghold is undertaken with caution. Every new face viewed with suspicion. Sometimes, you might even find yourself collecting taxes from Roman citizens living in the provinces. While they were generally exempt from direct taxes, they were subject to customs duties. And often, if they were involved in business, they too could become indebted. Dealing with a fellow Roman, perhaps one with connections in the capital, adds another layer of complexity and potential danger to your already precarious position. You can't simply strong-arm them as you might a provincial farmer. So, as you review your accounts late into the night, the flickering oil lamp casting long shadows across your desk, you see not just numbers, but faces. The faces of the desperate, the defiant, and the utterly broken. You see the compromises you've made, the lines you've crossed, and the ruthless efficiency you've cultivated to simply stay afloat. The pursuit of the Roman quota turns you into a different person, hardened by necessity, burdened by the endless cycle of demanding, extracting, and sometimes destroying. It's a heavy price to pay, not just for the provincials, but for you, the Roman publican. You've battled the angry populace, navigated the treacherous whims of governors, and wrestled with the moral ambiguities of bribery and bad debts. Yet, a more terrifying specter constantly haunts your waking hours and invades your restless sleep, the chilling realization of what happens when Rome comes knocking for you. You, the publican, who once held such immense power, suddenly find yourself on the other side of the ledger, facing the very same unforgiving system you wielded against others. Imagine, if you will, a crisp morning in Asia Minor. You're reviewing your accounts, perhaps feeling a flicker of cautious optimism. Collections have been difficult, yes, but you're on track, or so you hope. Then, a messenger arrives, breathless, his face pale. He brings news from Rome, not a routine dispatch, but a summons, a formal, official summons from the Senate, or worse, from the emperor's personal agents. The very sight of the imperial seal sends a cold dread through your veins. This isn't a friendly inquiry. This is an accusation. Perhaps a disgruntled provincial, emboldened by a sympathetic governor, has lodged a formal complaint against your abuses. Perhaps a rival publican, eager to snatch your lucrative contract, has spread rumors and whispered accusations in the ears of powerful senators. Or perhaps, most terrifyingly, your syndicate in Rome has failed to make a payment to the state on time, and the entire burden now falls squarely on your shoulders. You remember the old Roman saying, often repeated with a grim chuckle, "When Rome needs its coin, it doesn't ask, it takes." And now, it's taking from you. The charges can be varied: embezzlement of public funds, extortion beyond the legal limits, failure to meet your contracted quota, or even treason for allegedly inciting unrest by your heavy-handed tactics. Rome doesn't need irrefutable proof. Often, suspicion and political convenience are enough. You are considered guilty until proven innocent, and the deck is heavily stacked against you. Your first thought is to appeal, to explain the difficulties, the droughts, the rebellions, the impossible demands. But Rome isn't interested in excuses. They are interested in results. In the cold, hard cash that fuels their empire. The legal process, while formal, is often a brutal spectacle designed to send a clear message: no one, not even a publican, is above the state, is above the... A fascinating, yet terrifying aspect of Roman law regarding publicans was the concept of pecunia repetundae, or things to be reclaimed. This was a legal action specifically designed to recover extorted money from officials and public contractors. While it was theoretically meant to protect provincials, it could also be weaponized by political rivals or used by the state to reclaim funds from a publican who had failed to deliver. Imagine being hauled before a Roman court, accused of having stolen from the very people you were tasked to collect from, with the weight of the entire empire's judicial system bearing down on you. The process often begins with your assets being frozen. Your meticulously built fortune, the villas, the lands, the investments, the very wealth you risked your life to accumulate, all of it is suddenly out of your reach, seized by Roman officials. You, who once seized the property of others, now watch helplessly as your own is inventoried and confiscated. It's a bitter taste of your own medicine, a cruel irony that only highlights the precarious nature of your profession. You might be placed under house arrest, or even imprisoned, awaiting trial. The grandeur of your provincial office is replaced by the cold, damp walls of a Roman jail cell. The lavish banquets and the fawning agents are gone, replaced by the grim faces of guards and the echoing silence of your own despair. A Roman wit might suggest that a publican's ultimate tax was paid with their own freedom, and sometimes their life. The trial itself is often a public spectacle. Accusations are hurled. Witnesses, often those very provincials you once oppressed, testify against you, their voices dripping with long-suppressed resentment. Your reputation, painstakingly built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency, is dragged through the mud. You become a symbol of corruption, a convenient scapegoat for the empire's fiscal woes and the provincial suffering. And consider the sheer difficulty of defending yourself. You are far from the province, unable to easily call your own witnesses or gather evidence. Your agents, fearing for their own livelihoods, might turn against you, offering testimony to save their own skins. The powerful figures you once bribed or blackmailed might now deny any involvement, leaving you exposed and vulnerable. You are truly on your own, facing the formidable might of the Roman legal machine. Historians still widely agree that the trials of publicans for repetundae were often politically motivated, serving as opportunities for ambitious senators to gain popularity by appearing to champion the cause of the provincials. While some publicans were undoubtedly guilty of gross abuses, others were likely victims of political expediency, their wealth and contracts too tempting a target for those seeking power. So, even if you were innocent by some strict legal definition, if you were politically inconvenient, your fate was likely sealed. If found guilty, the consequences are severe. First and foremost, you are forced to repay the alleged extorted sums, often multiple times over. This means the complete confiscation of your remaining assets, leaving you utterly destitute. Your family, once accustomed to a life of comfort, is plunged into poverty, branded with the shame of your conviction. But it doesn't end there. You might face exile, banished from Rome and its territories, stripped of your Roman citizenship, condemned to wander the fringes of the empire with nothing but your clothes on your back, or, in the most severe cases, particularly if the charges involve outright treason or massive fraud against the state, you could face execution. Imagine the very legions you helped fund, the very laws you enforced, now turning against you, leading you to your final, ignominious end. The psychological impact of this downfall is immense. You, who once held others' lives and fortunes in your hands, are now utterly powerless. The arrogance, the ruthlessness, the calculated detachment you cultivated to survive as a publican, all of it crumbles in the face of Rome's cold, impersonal justice. You realize, perhaps too late, that you were just another cog in the machine and easily replaceable. This threat constantly hangs over every publican, a sword of Damocles suspended by the thinnest of threads. It's why they were so ruthless in their collections, so desperate to meet their quotas, so willing to take risks. Because the alternative was not just financial ruin, but a complete and utterly devastating fall from grace, a public humiliation that would leave you with nothing but your tarnished name. So, as you pace your cell, or perhaps plead your case before a stern Roman judge, you reflect on the choices you made, the people you oppressed, and the wealth you amassed. It all seems so meaningless now, overshadowed by the terrifying reality of Rome's judgment. The empire demands its due, and for a publican who has failed, that due often includes everything you ever possessed, and sometimes even your very life. You've experienced the wrath of the populace, the whims of the governor, and the cold judgment of Rome itself. But even if you somehow manage to navigate these treacherous waters and avoid a total downfall, there's an insidious, pervasive burden that no publican ever truly escapes: the social stigma and the deep-seated contempt for your profession. Even if you became fabulously wealthy, built sprawling villas, and acquired political influence, you would forever be an outcast, viewed with suspicion and loathing by nearly every segment of Roman society. Imagine attending a lavish banquet in Rome, a gathering of senators, equestrians, and esteemed citizens. You've been invited, Perhaps out of political necessity, or because your wealth is too great to ignore. You wear the finest toga. Your fingers gleam with expensive rings, and you recline on a comfortable couch. Yet, you feel an invisible wall between yourself and the other guests. Their conversations flow easily, their laughter genuine. But when you speak, there's a subtle hesitation, a slight stiffening, a polite but unmistakable distance. This isn't just snobbery, it's a profound moral judgment. In Roman society, true honor and respect were traditionally derived from military prowess, political service, or landed gentry. Commerce, while necessary, was often viewed with a degree of disdain, and tax collection. That was considered the absolute bottom rung of respectable professions. It was seen as parasitic, exploitative, and fundamentally dishonorable. A Roman poet might lament that a publican's gold was always tainted, no matter how shiny. You hear the whispers, even if they're not directed at you. He's a publicanus. The word itself is spat out, laced with contempt. You are associated with greed, avarice, and oppression. Even if you, personally, tried to be fair, even if you paid your dues to the state honestly. The sins of the system and the abuses of your less scrupulous colleagues were laid at your feet. You were guilty by association, forever tainted by the nature of your work. Consider the historical perception. From the very beginning, when Rome first outsourced tax collection, publicans gained a reputation for ruthless efficiency and, often, outright rapaciousness. They operated without genuine oversight in distant provinces, and the temptations for corruption were immense. This created a lasting stereotype, one that permeated Roman literature, philosophy, and everyday conversation. A fascinating example of this widespread disdain can be found in the New Testament, where tax collectors are consistently grouped with sinners. This isn't just a religious condemnation. It reflects the pervasive cultural revulsion for the profession across the Roman world. Even if you were a Roman citizen, your chosen profession immediately marked you as morally compromised, a pariah in the eyes of many. You might try to buy respectability. You could fund public works, a new aqueduct, a renovated temple, games for the populace. You could sponsor plays or gladiator fights. These acts of generosity, known as munera, were a common way for wealthy Romans to gain favor and prestige. But for a publican, it often felt like trying to wash away an indelible stain. People would accept your money, enjoy your spectacles, but the underlying contempt would remain. Oh, the publicanus is trying to buy his way into heaven again, they'd sneer behind their hands. Even your children would face this stigma. Imagine your son trying to enter politics, or your daughter seeking a prestigious marriage. The family name would be whispered about, not for valor or virtue, but for the ill-gotten gains of their father. Ah, yes, the son of that publican. This social burden would follow your family for generations, a silent curse inherited with your vast, but tainted, fortune. Historians still debate the true social mobility of publicans, while some clearly rose to immense wealth and political influence. How much of that was genuine acceptance versus mere tolerance due to their financial power? Were they ever truly integrated into the highest echelons of Roman society, or always viewed as a separate, slightly unsavory class, tolerated for their utility but never truly embraced? It's a nuanced question, but the evidence points to a pervasive, if sometimes subtle, social ostracization. Your relationships would be strained, genuine friendships might be rare, as others would constantly suspect your motives. Was that senator befriending you for your money, or for genuine camaraderie? Could your business partners be trusted, or were they simply waiting for an opportunity to stab you in the back? Knowing your reputation would make it easy to discredit you. You live in a world of constant suspicion, unable to truly relax or trust those around you. Even those who benefited from your services, the Roman state, the governors you bribed, would ultimately view you as expendable. When push came to shove, when public outcry against publican abuses grew too loud, Rome would be quick to throw you under the chariot, sacrificing a few publicans to appease the masses and maintain the illusion of justice. You were a tool, a necessary evil, but never truly valued. Think about the psychological toll of being so universally loathed. You develop a hardened exterior, a cynicism that colors every interaction. You might try to convince yourself that their contempt doesn't matter, that their envy fuels your success. But deep down, the isolation, the constant suspicion, and the knowledge that you are seen as a pariah must eat away at you. A Roman philosopher might ponder if a publican could ever truly find peace, or if their sleep was always haunted by the specter of public scorn. This social stigma also extended to your personal security. While you hired guards and fortified your home, the general public animosity meant that you were always a potential target. A robbery might be viewed with less sympathy by local authorities. An attack might be quietly celebrated by the common folk. You were on your own, protected only by your wealth and your ruthlessness, but never by the goodwill of the people. So, even if you retired with a fortune, living a life of apparent luxury, the ghost of your profession would always haunt you. The whispers, the glances, the subtle disdain, they would follow you into your grand villa, across your manicured gardens, and even into your final resting place. Your tomb might be opulent, your epitaph boasting of your wealth. But in the collective memory of the Roman people, you would forever remain the publican, a name synonymous with exploitation and public disdain. This social death, perhaps even more than financial ruin, was the constant, gnawing price you paid for your life as a Roman tax collector. You've endured the hatred, the political maneuvering, and the pervasive social stigma. But for some publicans, the relentless pressure, the mounting debts, and the sheer impossibility of their task led to desperate measures. When the system closed in and ruin stared them in the face, they looked for escape routes from ruin to rebellion. Sometimes, these were frantic attempts at self-preservation, sometimes desperate pleas for mercy, and occasionally, acts of defiance that shook the very foundations of Roman rule. Imagine you're months into your contract in Asia Minor. The harvest was abysmal. A plague swept through several key towns, and a series of bandit raids have crippled trade routes. Your agents return with empty hands, their faces grim. You review your ledgers, your heart sinking with each calculated figure. The shortfall is immense, far more than you can possibly cover from your own fortune. The syndicate back in Rome is furious, demanding explanations, threatening to dissolve your partnership and leave you to face the state's wrath alone. Panic sets in. You've seen what happens to failed publicans' imprisonment. Confiscation of assets, public humiliation, perhaps even execution. This is not just a financial crisis. It's a matter of life and death. You pace your fortified villa, the walls that once symbolized your authority, now feeling like the confines of a cage. What can you do? A Roman proverb, perhaps, might suggest that a cornered rat bites hardest, and you, the publican, are certainly cornered. One desperate option was to simply flee the empire. Pack what meager assets you can, abandon your contract, and disappear into the vast, uncharted lands beyond Rome's control. Perhaps to Parthia, or the Germanic forests, or even across the Sahara. This was a perilous choice. You would be an outlaw, stripped of your Roman citizenship, forever living on the run, hunted by imperial agents who would seek to reclaim what you owed. You'd lose everything: your status, your identity, your past. But it might be preferable to the grim fate awaiting you in a Roman prison. Consider the utter humiliation of such an act. You, a man who once wielded immense power, who collected taxes for the mighty Roman Empire, reduced to a fugitive, living in squalor among barbarians or in remote, forgotten outposts. It's a testament to the severity of the publican's plight that such a desperate course of action was ever considered preferable to facing Roman justice. A more common, though equally fraught, escape route was to seek mercy or a renegotiation of your contract. You would dispatch urgent messages to your syndicate, begging them to intercede with the Senate or the emperor. You might send lavish gifts to powerful patrons, hoping they would use their influence to plead your case. You would argue force majeure, unforeseen circumstances beyond your control, hoping that Rome, in its infinite pragmatism, would acknowledge the impossibility of your situation and reduce your quota or grant you an extension. However, Rome was rarely merciful when it came to money. While there were rare instances of contracts being renegotiated, particularly during widespread famines or major wars, these were exceptions, not the rule. The Roman state often saw such pleas as weakness, an attempt to shirk your contractual obligations. You were expected to bear the risk, and to pay the price when things went wrong. The sheer size of the empire meant that individual misfortune was rarely given much weight against the demands of the state. A fascinating, though often tragic, detail is how some publicans, facing utter ruin, would attempt to extort even more brutally from the provincials in a desperate, last-ditch effort to meet their quota. Knowing they were facing destitution anyway, they would abandon all pretense of legality or fairness, seizing everything they could lay their hands on. This, of course, only fueled further hatred and resistance, often leading to their violent overthrow by the very people they were trying to fleece. It was a self-destructive spiral, a final, desperate act of a cornered beast. A local saying might describe it as drinking the very last drop, even if it's poisoned. Historians still openly debate the extent to which publican exploitation genuinely ignited widespread provincial rebellions, rather than just exacerbating existing grievances. While publicans were certainly a major source of discontent, it's often difficult to disentangle their specific abuses from broader anti-Roman sentiment. However, there are numerous historical accounts, such as those related to the Jewish revolts, where the heavy-handedness of tax collectors played a significant role in inflaming tensions and pushing populations towards open revolt against Rome. Indeed, some publicans, out of sheer desperation or perhaps a warped sense of self-preservation, might even have inadvertently incited or participated in local unrest. By pushing provincials to their breaking point, they could inadvertently trigger riots or even larger rebellions. In such chaotic situations, a publican might see an opportunity to disappear, or even to align themselves with the rebels in a bizarre, desperate bid for survival, hoping to escape Roman justice by joining the enemy. This was a truly extreme measure, effectively betraying the empire they once served. But for a man facing certain ruin, any option was on the table. Think about the psychological shift. You, who once represented Roman authority, now find yourself contemplating actions that are utterly treasonous. The lines between loyalty, self-preservation, and outright rebellion blur. You are no longer just a Roman citizen, but a man driven to the brink, willing to break any law, abandon any principle, to avoid the inevitable doom closing in. The Roman system, for all its efficiency, had a brutal way of creating its own enemies. By putting publicans in such an impossible position, it forced them to become instruments of oppression. And when those instruments broke, they often broke spectacularly, sometimes taking parts of the system down with them. So, as the shadows lengthen across your ledgers, and the stark reality of your impending ruin becomes undeniable, you consider your options. Do you flee? Do you beg for mercy? Or do you make a desperate, perhaps even treasonous, last stand? The choice is yours, publican, and each path leads to a different, equally uncertain, fate. The Roman Empire, in its demand for absolute tribute, has pushed you to the very edge, and what you do next will define your ultimate legacy. You've navigated the desperate choices of ruin and rebellion, only to confront the chilling, undeniable truth the very name tax collector in the Roman world remained synonymous with exploitation and public disdain, echoing through the centuries long after your final ledger was closed. This wasn't just a contemporary hatred, it was a deeply ingrained cultural loathing, a legacy of loathing that clung to the profession like dust to a Roman sandal. Imagine a Roman schoolroom, generations after your time. A young boy recites a passage from a playwright like Plautus, filled with unflattering caricatures of the Publicani greedy, grasping, and utterly devoid of moral character. Or perhaps he learns of a governor's trial, where the publican is presented as the primary villain, the architect of the provincial's misery, a convenient scapegoat for the empire's systemic issues. The narrative is consistent: publicans are bad. Very, very bad. This widespread condemnation wasn't accidental. It was a societal consensus forged through centuries of experience. From the earliest days of the Republic, when the state first outsourced its revenue collection, the Publicani quickly gained a reputation for ruthlessness. Operating far from Rome's immediate oversight, often in newly conquered territories, they faced immense pressure to meet their bids, which inevitably led to aggressive, often brutal, collection methods. A Roman historian might observe that publicans were the necessary poison Rome swallowed for its own growth. Think about the everyday language. To call someone a publican was an insult, a veiled accusation of corruption and avarice. It wasn't merely descriptive, it was pejorative. If you said someone was as honest as a publican, you were being deeply sarcastic, implying the exact opposite. This kind of linguistic imprint speaks volumes about the popular sentiment. A fascinating, though grim, detail is how the Roman legal system, while often complicit in enabling publican abuses, also provided a mechanism for their condemnation. The Repetundae trials we discussed earlier, where publicans and governors were prosecuted for extortion, became a popular platform for ambitious Roman politicians. By prosecuting a publican, a senator could grandstand, appear as a champion of justice, and curry favor with the people, both in Rome and the provinces. These trials, regardless of their true fairness, cemented the image of the publican as a public enemy. Historians still debate whether the popular hatred of publicans was entirely justified, or if it was partially a convenient narrative for Roman elites to deflect criticism from the state itself. Were publicans truly worse than other Roman officials, or simply easier targets due to their direct interaction with the taxed populace and their non-aristocratic origins? While there's no doubt that many publicans engaged in serious abuses, it's also likely that they bore the brunt of a generalized resentment against Roman rule, serving as lightning rods for frustrations that should have been directed higher up the chain. Even in later periods, as the Roman Empire evolved and the system of tax collection shifted somewhat, with some functions eventually moving to state officials rather than entirely outsourced publicans, the historical memory of the Publicani persisted. Their image became archetypal: the greedy, heartless collector who squeezed the last drop from the poor. This stereotype transcended specific individuals, or even specific periods, becoming a permanent fixture in the collective Roman consciousness. Consider the Roman playwrights, satirists, and philosophers. They frequently lampooned or condemned publicans. They were rarely portrayed as sympathetic figures, but rather as caricatures of avarice. This constant reinforcement in popular culture ensured that the negative perception endured, shaping public opinion for generations. It wasn't just official decrees or legal judgments that condemned them. It was the very fabric of Roman storytelling. You might have amassed immense wealth, retired to a grand villa, and tried to live out your days in luxury. But the shadow of your profession would always follow you. Your wealth itself would be seen as suspect, tainted by the means of its acquisition. No amount of civic generosity, no matter how grand, could fully cleanse your name of the indelible stain of being a publican. This legacy of loathing also had practical implications. Even centuries later, if a Roman official was accused of corruption, drawing parallels to the Publicani would be a powerful rhetorical weapon. The name invoked immediate recognition and condemnation, a shorthand for everything detestable about financial exploitation. So, as you reflect on your life as a publican, perhaps from the quiet solitude of your later years, you realize the true cost of your profession wasn't just the constant danger, the relentless pressure, or the ethical compromises. It was the enduring legacy of being universally hated, a permanent stain on your name and the name of your descendants. Your success, if you achieved it, was built on the suffering of others. And that truth, however inconvenient, would be remembered long after the specific details of your life faded. The Roman Empire moved on, but the bitter memory of the tax collector, forever synonymous with greed, remained. The final chapters of your life as a Roman publican drift into a quiet, yet unsettling twilight. You've either survived the gauntlet, perhaps retiring with a tarnished but immense fortune, or you've faced ruin, your life a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Either way, the relentless grind of collecting taxes for an insatiable empire has left an indelible mark, shaping not just your fate, but the very fabric of the societies you touched, the system you were a part of, with all its inherent cruelties and efficiencies, left a lasting impact on the Roman world, a complex legacy that still echoes through history. Think of the vast infrastructure projects Rome undertook, the magnificent aqueducts that carried fresh water to its cities, the intricate network of roads that crisscrossed the empire, the grand public buildings, the formidable legions that maintained its peace or imposed its will. All of these required immense funding, and much of that funding, particularly during the Republic and early Empire, flowed through the hands of publicans like you. You were, in a very real sense, a vital cog in the machine that built and sustained one of the greatest empires in history. Your ruthlessness, your efficiency, your relentless pursuit of revenue, however hated, contributed directly to the very grandeur of Rome. However, your contribution came at an enormous cost to the provinces. You were an instrument of extraction, siphoning wealth from conquered lands and channeling it back to the imperial core. This systematic drain of resources, facilitated by publicans, often stifled local economies, exacerbated poverty, and fueled deep-seated resentment. While Rome prospered, many of its provinces endured stagnation, their wealth constantly flowing outwards. A Roman economist, if they existed, might grimly note that the empire's growth was fed by the constant bleeding of its extremities. The methods you employed, the arbitrary assessments, the harsh collections, the often exploitative loans, left a profound mark on the legal and social landscape of the provinces. They contributed to a pervasive atmosphere of mistrust between the Roman state and its subjects. Locals learned to be suspicious, to hide their wealth, and to resent any display of Roman authority. This created a fertile ground for dissent, for brigandage, and ultimately, for rebellion. The seeds of future conflicts were often sown in the dusty fields where publicans extracted their dues. A fascinating aspect of the publican system's lasting impact is its role in the development of sophisticated Roman financial practices. The syndicates of publicans back in Rome were, in essence, early forms of joint stock companies, pooling capital, managing complex contracts, and operating across vast geographical distances. They required advanced accounting, legal expertise, and a keen understanding of risk management. While their methods were often morally questionable, their organizational structure and financial innovations laid groundwork for future commercial enterprises. Historians still widely agree that the Roman publican system, for all its notorious reputation, was an incredibly efficient, albeit brutal, mechanism for revenue collection for centuries. There's a lingering debate about whether any alternative system would have been more equitable while still providing the immense resources Rome demanded. It's a testament to its efficiency that it persisted for so long, despite the widespread hatred it engendered. The Publicani were a necessary evil, a reflection of Rome's pragmatic approach to governance and finance. Your life, then, becomes a microcosm of the empire itself, efficient, powerful, expansionist, but often at the expense of justice and humanity. You embodied Rome's practical genius and its moral blind spots. You were the cutting edge of its fiscal policy, and also the direct recipient of the backlash from those it exploited. The very controversies surrounding publicans, the trials, the literary condemnations, served a purpose. They provided a release valve for public anger, allowing Roman citizens and provincials to blame individual greed rather than the systemic nature of imperial taxation. By focusing on the bad apples, the notoriously corrupt publicans, the state could deflect criticism from its own rapacious demands. In this way, publicans often served as convenient scapegoats, embodying the negative aspects of Roman rule so that the empire itself could appear more benevolent, even as the empire transitioned to a more centralized system of tax collection in later centuries. The memory of the Publicani persisted as a dark archetype. The very word continued to evoke images of greed and oppression, a warning against unchecked power and financial exploitation. Their legacy was not one of honor or public service, but one of necessity and widespread revulsion. So, as the light fades, and you reflect on the totality of your experience, you see a complex tapestry woven from ambition, fear, wealth, and resentment. You were an essential, yet despised. Part of a colossal empire, you played your role, for good or ill, and the echoes of your actions, and those of your fellow publicans, continued to shape the history of Rome long after your days were done. The story of the Roman tax collector is not just a tale of individual hardship, but a crucial lens through which to understand the enduring complexities of power, money, and human nature in one of the world's most formidable empires.